A 6-year-old boy, burned alive. A 36-year-old woman, fused to a couch. A baby, set on fire in the woods. These aren't horror movie plots. These are real crimes. Real victims. Real Louisiana mothers who crossed a line so dark, so unthinkable, that their names will forever be etched in the annals of evil. Welcome to Crime Unknown. I'm bringing you 10 cases from Louisiana that will make you question everything you thought you knew about maternal instinct. From the swamps of DeSoto Parish to the suburbs of New Orleans, these stories span over 3 decades of unimaginable betrayal. Before we dive in, if you're fascinated by true crime and want to stay updated on cases like these, make sure to like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button. Your support keeps this channel running and helps us bring you the most comprehensive crime documentaries on YouTube. Let's get into it. Case 1. Yvonne Sepulvado. March 8, 1992. DeSoto Parish, Louisiana. A 6-year-old boy named Wesley Allen Mercer took his last breath in a bathtub filled with scalding water. His skin was burning. His head was bleeding from multiple blunt force injuries. And standing nearby was the one person who should have protected him, his mother, Yvonne Sepulvado. Yvonne Mercer Sepulvado wasn't born a monster. She was a single mother trying to navigate life after her first marriage fell apart. In September of 1990, she met Christopher Sepulvado. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, it became Wesley's death sentence. Christopher Sepulvado wasn't just Yvonne's boyfriend. He was her abuser. Their relationship was toxic from day one. Yvonne would move in with him, then move out when things got violent. Her family begged her to stay away. They saw the bruises. They heard the fights. But Yvonne kept going back. In January of 1991, despite every warning from her loved ones, Yvonne packed up 6-year-old Wesley and moved to Mansfield, Louisiana, to live with Sepulvado full-time. That's when the real nightmare began. Because once Yvonne was under Sepulvado's roof, he didn't just abuse her. He turned his rage toward Wesley. The little boy became the target. Sepulvado would hit him, scream at him, deny him food. And Yvonne? She watched. She stood by. She did nothing. Let me paint you a picture of Wesley. Born October 6, 1985, he was a kindergartner at Mansfield Elementary School. A small boy with his whole life ahead of him. A child who should have been playing with toys, learning to read, making friends. Instead, he was living in terror. By early 1992, the abuse had escalated. Yvonne and Sepulvado would go through cycles. She'd leave him because of the violence, then return weeks later, dragging Wesley back into the nightmare. In late 1991, she came back once again. This time, she even agreed to marry Sepulvado. They tied the knot on March 5, 1992. 3 days later, Wesley was dead. Here's what happened in those final 72 hours. From March 6 through March 8, Wesley was systematically tortured. Sepulvado and Yvonne starved the boy. They refused to give him food. When Wesley begged for something to eat, they ignored him. When he cried from hunger, they punished him. On March 8, 1992, Christopher Sepulvado decided Wesley needed to be taught a lesson. He grabbed a screwdriver handle, a thick, blunt piece of metal, and began striking Wesley on the head. Over and over. The little boy's skull couldn't withstand the force. He lost consciousness. But Sepulvado wasn't done. He dragged Wesley's limp body to the bathroom, filled the bathtub with water so hot it could scald flesh, and submerged the unconscious child. Third-degree burns began forming across Wesley's body instantly. 58% of his skin was destroyed by the heat. Yvonne was there. She saw what was happening, and she did nothing. Approximately 3 hours after the assault began, someone finally called for help. Wesley was rushed to DeSoto General Hospital, but it was far too late. The little boy was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. When hospital staff examined Wesley's body, they immediately knew this wasn't an accident. His injuries were too severe, too deliberate. They contacted law enforcement. An autopsy was ordered. Dr. George McCormick performed the autopsy, and what he found was horrifying. Wesley had died from heart and lung failure caused by the massive third-degree burns covering 58% of his body. But that wasn't all. The little boy also had multiple head wounds consistent with blunt force trauma. His skull had been struck repeatedly with significant force. The evidence was overwhelming. This was murder. DeSoto Parish authorities arrested both Christopher Sepulvado and Yvonne Sepulvado. They were each charged with killing Wesley. The question wasn't whether they did it. The question was what role each played and what their punishment would be. Christopher Sepulvado went to trial first. On April 17, 1993, a DeSoto Parish jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. The evidence against him was damning. He was the one who struck Wesley with the screwdriver handle. He was the one who placed the boy in the scalding bathwater. He was the primary aggressor. The jury recommended the death penalty. The judge agreed. Christopher Sepulvado was sentenced to death and sent to Louisiana State Penitentiary to await execution. But what about Yvonne? Yvonne Sepulvado was tried separately. Her defense attorneys argued that she was also a victim. They pointed to the documented history of domestic violence. They showed the jury evidence of Yvonne's own injuries from Sepulvado's abuse. They claimed she was too afraid to stop him, too beaten down to protect her son. The prosecution wasn't buying it. They argued that being a victim of abuse doesn't give you permission to let your child be murdered. They pointed out that Yvonne had multiple opportunities to leave. Her family had offered to help her. She could have called police. She could have fled with Wesley. Instead, she chose to stay. She chose Sepulvado over her son. The jury found a middle ground. They convicted Yvonne not of first-degree murder like her husband, but of manslaughter. The original charge had been second-degree murder, but the jury reduced it. They believed she bore responsibility for Wesley's death, but not to the same degree as Sepulvado. Yvonne Sepulvado was sentenced to 21 years in prison. 21 years. For watching her son be beaten and burned to death. For failing to protect him. For choosing an abusive man over her child's life. Yvonne served approximately 7.5 years behind bars. In 2002, she was released from prison. She walked free while her son remained 6 years old forever, buried in the ground. In February of 2013, Yvonne gave an interview. She expressed sadness over Wesley's death. She acknowledged that she bore some responsibility for not leaving the toxic relationship. But even then, years later, she maintained that she didn't kill her son. She framed herself as another victim. And what happened to Christopher Sepulvado, the man who actually struck the fatal blows? He spent 33 years on death row at Louisiana State Penitentiary. For 3 decades, he sat in a cell, waiting for the state to execute him. Appeals were filed and denied. Execution dates were set and postponed. The case dragged on and on. Christopher Sepulvado became Louisiana's oldest death row inmate. He was 81 years old and had been on death row longer than almost anyone else in the state's history. Finally, in early 2025, Louisiana scheduled his execution. It was set for February. But Christopher Sepulvado never made it to the execution chamber. On February 22, 2025, less than 2 weeks before his scheduled execution, he died of natural causes in his cell. He was 81 years old. Wesley Allen Mercer never got to be 81. He never got to be 7. He died at 6 years old in a bathtub in Mansfield, Louisiana, because the 2 people who were supposed to love him most decided his life didn't matter. This case became a landmark in Louisiana legal history. It shaped how courts handle death row inmates and raised questions about the justice system's handling of domestic violence victims who become complicit in crimes. Wesley's death wasn't just a tragedy. It became a cautionary tale about the deadly consequences of staying in abusive relationships and the unforgivable sin of failing to protect innocent children. Yvonne Sepulvado served her time and disappeared from public view. Christopher Sepulvado died awaiting execution. But Wesley? Wesley's story ended in that bathtub in 1992. His voice was silenced. His future was stolen. And Louisiana will never forget what happened to that little boy in DeSoto Parish. Case 2. Amy Hebert. August 20th, 2007. Matthews, Louisiana, Lafourche Parish. A coworker walks into a house at 118 St. Anthony Street. She's worried because Amy Hebert, a teacher's aide at Lockport Lower Elementary School, didn't show up for work. That wasn't like Amy. She always came to work. Always. The coworker knocks on the door. No answer. She tries the handle. It's unlocked. She pushes the door open and steps inside. What she finds is a scene so horrific, so unthinkable, that law enforcement officers who responded that day still have nightmares about it. Amy Hebert, 40 years old, is covered in blood. She has approximately 30 self-inflicted stab wounds all over her body. But she's alive. Barely conscious, but alive. In the bedroom, 2 children lie in bed. 9-year-old Camille Catherine Hebert, 7-year-old Braxton John Hebert. Both are dead, stabbed multiple times, their bodies already in rigor mortis. And near them, also dead, the family dog, Princess. Amy Hebert had murdered her own children. Let's back up and understand who Amy Hebert was before August 20th, 2007. Amy wasn't some stranger who wandered in off the street. She was a respected member of the Matthews community. She worked with children at Lockport Lower Elementary as a teacher's aide. Parents trusted her with their kids. Students liked her. She was also deeply religious, an evangelical Christian who attended church regularly and spoke often about her faith. From the outside, Amy looked like a devoted mother and a good person. But beneath the surface, Amy was struggling. And that struggle had deep roots. Mental illness ran in Amy's family like a genetic curse. Her sister had experienced a severe psychotic breakdown. Her uncle had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Her maternal grandfather had taken his own life through suicide. The warning signs were there, written in her family's DNA. Amy had been married to Chad Hebert. They had 2 children together, Camille and Braxton. Braxton had been diagnosed as mildly autistic, which added extra stress to the family dynamic. But for years, they managed. They were a family. Then the marriage fell apart. Chad Hebert filed for divorce in 2005. The divorce was finalized in April of 2006. The court awarded joint custody of the children. Camille and Braxton would split time between their mother and father. At first, things seemed okay. Amy and Chad co-parented civilly. The kids adjusted to living in 2 households. But in June of 2007, something shifted. Chad started dating someone new. He had a girlfriend. Amy couldn't handle it. The thought of another woman in her children's lives, of her ex-husband moving on, of being replaced, it ate at her. She became obsessed with controlling the situation. She began restricting the children's visits to Chad's family. She didn't want Camille and Braxton around Chad's new girlfriend. She wanted to limit their exposure. The custody arrangement became a battleground. Amy felt like she was losing control. Her ex-husband was happy. He was moving forward. And she couldn't stand it. In the weeks leading up to August 20th, Amy's mental state deteriorated rapidly. She wrote notes. Angry, bitter notes addressed to Chad and his mother. In those notes, she blamed Chad for their marriage failing. She accused him of infidelity. She expressed rage that he dared to find happiness with someone else. And then she wrote the words that would later become evidence in her trial. Chad would not get the children. If she couldn't have them, neither could he. On the night of August 19th going into August 20th, 2007, Amy Hebert made a decision. She couldn't let Chad win. She couldn't let another woman raise her babies. She couldn't let the divorce end with him being happy while she was miserable. So she decided to take away the one thing that mattered most to both of them. She decided to kill Camille and Braxton. Amy waited until the children were asleep. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and she went to work. 9-year-old Camille was attacked first. Evidence would later show that Camille woke up during the assault. She fought back. She had defensive wounds on her hands and arms where she tried to protect herself from her mother's blade. But she was 9 years old. She was no match for an adult woman with a knife. Amy stabbed Camille approximately 30 to 35 times in the torso. Then she stabbed her approximately 30 more times in the scalp. 60 to 65 stab wounds total. The little girl was attacked in Amy's bedroom and then in the bathroom. She tried to escape. She tried to run, but her mother chased her down. When Camille was dead, Amy turned to 7-year-old Braxton, the little boy with autism who needed extra care and attention, the child she claimed to love more than anything. Amy stabbed Braxton approximately 50 to 55 times. Like his sister, Braxton had defensive wounds on his hands and arms. He fought back. He tried to protect himself. But he was 7 years old, and his attacker was his mother. After killing both children, Amy turned the knife on the family dog. Princess was stabbed to death in the utility room. Every living thing in that house that she loved, Amy destroyed. And then she turned the knife on herself. She stabbed herself approximately 30 times, trying to make it look like someone else had done this. Trying to create a narrative where she was also a victim. But she didn't stab herself deeply enough. She survived. When Amy's coworker found her around 9:30 a.m. on August 20th, Amy was still alive, covered in her own blood and the blood of her children. The coworker immediately called 911. Jefferson Parish Sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes. They entered the house and found the carnage. 2 dead children, a dead dog, and a barely conscious woman covered in stab wounds. Deputies attempted to restrain Amy, but she was combative. They had to use a taser to subdue her so paramedics could treat her wounds. She was transported to the hospital under police guard. While Amy was being treated, investigators processed the crime scene. The Jefferson Parish Crime Lab analyzed blood spatter patterns, the location of wounds, the position of the bodies. They determined that Camille had been attacked in multiple locations. She'd been trying to escape. Braxton had been attacked in the bedroom. The dog had been killed in the utility room. This wasn't a home invasion. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a mother methodically murdering her entire family. Investigators found the handwritten suicide notes Amy had left for Chad and his mother. The notes were filled with bitterness, resentment, and rage. They blamed Chad for the divorce. They accused him of cheating, and they made it clear he would not get the children, because Amy had already taken them. Amy Hebert was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Louisiana law allows for the death penalty in first-degree murder cases, especially when the victims are children. Amy was facing execution. District Attorney Camille Cam Morvant II took on the case. It was his first capital murder prosecution, his first death penalty case. The pressure was enormous. The community was watching. The Hebert family was watching. And the entire state of Louisiana wanted justice for Camille and Braxton. Amy's defense team brought in heavy hitters. They hired George Parnham, a high-profile attorney who had previously defended Andrea Yates, the Texas mother who drowned her 5 children in a bathtub and was found not guilty by reason of insanity. If anyone could mount an insanity defense, it was Parnham. The defense strategy was clear. Amy was insane at the time of the murders. She wasn't responsible for her actions. She was suffering from severe depression, possibly psychosis. She needed psychiatric help, not prison. The defense brought in psychiatrist Dr. Alexandra Phillips to evaluate Amy. Dr. Phillips testified that Amy told her she believed Satan was in the room, laughing at her during the murders. She claimed Amy was experiencing religious delusions and was in the grip of a psychotic break. The prosecution wasn't convinced. They argued that Amy's actions showed premeditation and planning. She wrote suicide notes before the murders. She waited until the children were asleep. She attacked them systematically, one at a time. She tried to kill herself afterward to avoid consequences. That's not insanity. That's calculated murder. The trial began in May of 2009. The courtroom was packed. The Hebert family sat on one side. Supporters of Amy, though there were few, sat on the other. The jury listened to days of testimony. They saw crime scene photos that made some jurors cry. They heard about the defensive wounds on Camille and Braxton's little hands. They read the bitter suicide notes. On May 15, 2009, after less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty on both counts. Now came the penalty phase. Would Amy Hebert get the death penalty or life in prison? In Louisiana, a death penalty verdict requires a unanimous jury vote. All 12 jurors must agree. The jury deliberated on Amy's fate and voted 9-3 in favor of death. 9 jurors wanted her executed, but 3 voted for life in prison. Because the vote wasn't unanimous, the death penalty was off the table. The default sentence for first-degree murder in Louisiana when the death penalty isn't imposed is life in prison without the possibility of parole. But Judge Jerome Barbera had another decision to make. Should the sentences for killing Camille and killing Braxton run concurrently, at the same time, or consecutively, one after the other? Judge Barbera chose consecutive sentences. 2 life sentences without parole, served back-to-back. Even though Amy would never be eligible for parole anyway, the judge wanted to make a statement. Amy Hebert took 2 precious lives, and she would pay for each one separately. Amy Hebert was sent to the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women to serve her 2 consecutive life sentences. But her legal fight wasn't over. Her attorneys filed appeals. They argued the trial was unfair. They argued the jury was biased. They argued Amy deserved a new trial. The Louisiana Supreme Court denied her appeal in October of 2011. They denied another appeal in October of 2015. The U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals denied her federal appeal in May of 2018. And in April of 2019, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear her case. Every legal avenue was exhausted. Amy Hebert would die in prison. Today, Amy Hebert remains incarcerated at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women. She will never see freedom again. She will never attend another family gathering. She will never celebrate another Christmas or birthday outside of prison walls. Meanwhile, the community of Matthews has worked to honor Camille and Braxton's memory. The Camille and Braxton Hebert Memorial Fund was established. Using donations from the community, the fund built 2 playgrounds, one at Lockport Lower Elementary called Braxton's Buddies, and one at Lockport Upper Elementary called Camille's Court. Children who never knew Camille and Braxton play on those playgrounds today. They laugh and run and climb, completely unaware that the playground they're enjoying exists because 2 children were murdered by their mother. The Memorial Fund also established scholarships at Nichols State University for education majors. Every year, students who want to become teachers receive financial help in Camille and Braxton's names. The children Amy killed have helped educate dozens of future teachers. It's a beautiful legacy, but it doesn't change the fact that Camille should be 27 years old today. Braxton should be 25. They should be alive, building careers, maybe starting families of their own. Instead, they're frozen in time. Forever 9 and 7. Forever victims of the woman who was supposed to protect them. Amy Hebert took everything from them, and Louisiana made sure she paid the price. Case 3, Lora Moseley. 1999. Somewhere in Louisiana, a 6-year-old girl named Heather White is being abused. Physically, sexually, repeatedly. And the one person who could stop it, the one person legally obligated to protect her, is her own mother, Lora Moseley. Lora doesn't stop it. She watches. She knows. And she does nothing. This is one of those cases that makes you question how a mother can fail so completely. How does someone look the other way while their child suffers? How do you prioritize a relationship with a man over the safety of your own daughter? Lora Moseley was in a relationship with a man named Donald Wright. We don't know exactly how they met or how long they'd been together. What we do know is that Donald Wright was a predator. He was physically abusing Heather White, Lora's 6-year-old daughter. And he was sexually abusing her too. This wasn't a one-time incident. This wasn't something that happened behind Lora's back when she was at work or out running errands. The investigation revealed that Wright abused Heather repeatedly, over an extended period of time, and Lora was present during the abuse. Let that sink in. Lora Moseley was in the room. She saw what was happening to her daughter. She heard Heather's cries. She witnessed the injuries. And she did nothing. Why? The most common explanation in cases like this is that the mother fears her partner more than she loves her child. Lora was likely being abused herself. She may have been financially dependent on Wright. She may have been isolated from family and friends. She may have been threatened. But here's the thing. Being a victim yourself doesn't absolve you of the responsibility to protect your child. Being afraid doesn't give you permission to let someone torture and molest your daughter. At some point, you have to make a choice. And Lora Moseley made the wrong one. The abuse escalated. Donald Wright wasn't content with just hurting Heather. He wanted to destroy her completely. On the day that would become the focus of the criminal case, Wright crossed the final line. 6-year-old Heather White was murdered. The details of how she died aren't fully public, likely because of the sensitive nature of a child victim case. But what we know is that Heather died as a result of the physical and sexual abuse inflicted by Donald Wright, and Lora Moseley bore responsibility for failing to protect her or report the abuse. When authorities discovered Heather's death, they launched a full investigation. Medical examiners documented the injuries. Detectives interviewed neighbors, family members, anyone who had contact with the household. And what they found was a pattern of abuse that had been going on for months, maybe longer. Lora Moseley knew. She had to know. The injuries Heather sustained weren't invisible. The sexual abuse would have caused physical signs. A 6-year-old child suffering that kind of trauma would have shown behavioral changes, regression, fear, withdrawal. But Lora never called police. She never took Heather to a doctor. She never asked for help. She prioritized Donald Wright over her daughter's life. Both Lora Moseley and Donald Wright were arrested and charged with murder. The prosecution had to prove not just that Wright killed Heather, but that Lora bore criminal responsibility for allowing it to happen. In Louisiana, there's a legal concept called failure to protect. Parents have a legal duty to shield their children from harm. If you know your child is being abused and you do nothing, you can be charged as an accomplice to the abuse. And if that abuse results in death, you can be charged with murder. That's exactly what happened to Lora Moseley. The case went to trial. The prosecution laid out the timeline of abuse. They presented evidence of Heather's injuries. They showed that Lora had multiple opportunities to intervene and chose not to. They argued that Lora's silence and inaction made her just as guilty as right. The defense likely argued that Lora was also a victim, that she feared right, that she was being controlled and manipulated. They may have tried to paint her as someone who wanted to help, but was too scared. But the jury didn't buy it. They found Lora Moseley guilty of her role in Heather's death. Lora Moseley was sentenced to life imprisonment. Life. Behind bars. For the rest of her days. Because she watched her daughter suffer and did nothing to stop it. Donald Wright, the man who actually inflicted the abuse and caused Heather's death, was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. He remains on Louisiana's death row to this day, awaiting execution. But here's the thing. Wright being on death row doesn't make Lora any less culpable. She was Heather's mother. She brought Heather into this world. She had a duty to protect her. And she failed in the most catastrophic way possible. Think about Heather for a moment. 6 years old. Still believing in fairy tales, and thinking her mommy would keep her safe. Still trusting that home was supposed to be a safe place. Still hoping that someone would rescue her. But nobody came. Her mother turned her back. Her mother chose a man over her. Her mother let her die? Lora Moseley is serving her life sentence somewhere in the Louisiana correctional system. She will never be free again. She will grow old behind bars, spending every day knowing that she allowed her daughter to be tortured and killed. Meanwhile, Heather White is gone. She never got to go to first grade. Never got to lose her first tooth or learn to ride a bike. Never got to grow up, fall in love, have children of her own. Her life ended at 6 because her mother failed her. Donald Wright sits on death row, waiting for the state to end his life. When that day comes, he'll be strapped to a gurney and administered a lethal injection. Some people will say justice was served. Others will argue about the morality of the death penalty. But Heather will still be dead. And Lora Moseley will still be the mother who watched it happen. This case is a reminder that failure to act is still a choice. Silence is still complicity. And when a child dies because a parent looked the other way, that parent bears responsibility. Lora Moseley learned that lesson the hard way. She will pay for it for the rest of her life. But Heather White paid the ultimate price. And that's the real tragedy of this case. Case 4, Tiffany Woods. August 29, 2005. Hurricane Katrina slams into the Gulf Coast. New Orleans is drowning. Families are fleeing for their lives. Tiffany Woods, a 25-year-old mother, loads up her car with her boyfriend Emmanuel Scott and their 4 small children, including 2-month-old baby Emmanuel. They drive 320 miles north to Shreveport, Louisiana, seeking safety. They have nothing. No home. No belongings. Just the clothes on their backs and the hope that they'll survive this disaster. But baby Emmanuel wouldn't survive. And 5 years later, Tiffany Woods and Emmanuel Scott would be convicted of second-degree murder for letting their infant starve to death. This case is complicated. It's not as simple as calling Tiffany Woods evil and moving on. This is a case that highlights the impossible decisions poor families face after disasters, the failures of government safety nets, and Louisiana's extraordinarily harsh criminal laws. Let's start with the baby. Baby Emmanuel Scott was born premature in New Orleans. He came into the world too early, his little body not fully ready. He had a genetic abnormality, a medical condition that required monitoring and follow-up testing. The doctors at the hospital in New Orleans discharged him with instructions. Bring him back for regular checkups. Make sure he's eating enough. Watch for warning signs. Baby Emmanuel was only about 3 weeks old when Hurricane Katrina hit. The Woods-Scott family barely had time to bond with him before their entire world fell apart. When the levees broke and New Orleans began flooding, the family had to make a split-second decision: stay and risk drowning, or flee and figure out the rest later. They chose to flee. They drove through the night, arriving in Shreveport exhausted, traumatized, and broke. They had no family in Shreveport, no friends, no support system. They were refugees in their own state. The family ended up in a shelter, one of many emergency shelters set up to house Katrina evacuees. From August through October of 2005, they lived there. For children crammed into a temporary space with 2 adults trying to figure out how to survive. The baby needed formula. Tiffany and Emmanuel applied for government assistance. They received vouchers to purchase formula for baby Emmanuel. For a couple of months, the baby was fed properly. But then the vouchers ran out. It was October 2005. The government programs that had been set up in the immediate aftermath of Katrina were ending. Families were expected to be back on their feet. But Tiffany and Emmanuel weren't on their feet. They were still homeless, still broke, still struggling. When the formula vouchers stopped coming, Tiffany and Emmanuel faced a choice. They could try to purchase formula with money they didn't have, or they could find an alternative. They chose to buy organic cow's milk. They fed it to 2-month-old baby Emmanuel instead of formula. Now, let's be very clear. Feeding cow's milk to an infant is dangerous. Babies' digestive systems can't handle cow's milk. They need either breast milk or specially formulated infant formula. Cow's milk lacks the nutrients babies need and can cause serious health problems. But here's the thing. Tiffany Woods and Emmanuel Scott likely didn't know that. They were poor. They were uneducated. They were desperate. They saw milk in the grocery store and thought, milk is milk. The baby needs to eat. It was a fatal mistake. Baby Emmanuel's health began to decline. He wasn't getting the nutrition he needed. His little body started shutting down. He was malnourished, and then he developed pneumonia. Pneumonia in a malnourished infant is a death sentence if left untreated. The baby needed a doctor, needed a hospital, needed medical intervention. Tiffany and Emmanuel didn't take him to a doctor. Why not? That's the million-dollar question. The prosecution would later argue it was neglect, that they simply didn't care enough to seek help. The defense argued it was more complicated. They were still displaced, they didn't have insurance, they were terrified of the medical system, they didn't realize how sick the baby was. Whatever the reason, baby Emmanuel didn't see a doctor. He got sicker and sicker, and in approximately November of 2005, the 2-month-old baby died. He died of malnutrition. His tiny body had been starved of the nutrients it needed. Pneumonia had ravaged his underdeveloped lungs, and his parents hadn't sought medical care. When baby Emmanuel died, Tiffany and Emmanuel reported his death to authorities. That's when the investigation began. Medical examiners performed an autopsy. They determined that the baby had died from malnutrition with pneumonia as a contributing factor. They noted that the infant was severely underweight and showed signs of prolonged nutritional deficiency. Detectives interviewed Tiffany and Emmanuel. They asked why the baby wasn't taken to a doctor when he got sick. They asked why the baby was being fed cow's milk instead of formula. They asked why the parents didn't seek help when they ran out of vouchers. Tiffany and Emmanuel didn't have good answers. They admitted they fed the baby cow's milk. They admitted they didn't take him to a doctor. They said they didn't realize how sick he was until it was too late. The DeSoto Parish District Attorney's Office made a decision. Charge both parents with second-degree murder. Second-degree murder. Not manslaughter. Not criminally negligent homicide. Second-degree murder. A charge typically reserved for intentional killings. The DA's office argued that by failing to feed the baby properly and failing to seek medical care, Tiffany and Emmanuel had shown a depraved indifference to human life. Under Louisiana law, that's enough to support a second-degree murder conviction. Tiffany Woods and Emmanuel Scott were arrested in September of 2006, almost a year after their baby's death. They were both charged and faced mandatory life sentences if convicted. The case went to trial. Both defendants chose to have a bench trial, meaning a judge would decide their guilt or innocence, not a jury. Judge Jeanette Garrett presided. The prosecution presented the medical evidence. They showed that the baby had been starved. They argued that any reasonable parent would have taken a sick infant to a doctor. They said Tiffany and Emmanuel's failure to act constituted murder. The defense argued that this was a tragedy, not a crime. They pointed to the post-Katrina chaos. They emphasized that the parents had no support, no resources, no safety net. They argued that feeding the baby cow's milk wasn't malicious, it was ignorance. They said not taking the baby to the doctor was a mistake, not murder. Judge Garrett listened to both sides. She reviewed the evidence. She considered the law, and she found both Tiffany Woods and Emmanuel Scott guilty of second-degree murder. In 2008, both were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Mandatory. Automatic. No discretion. The case drew national attention. Legal experts were stunned. Professor Guyora Binder from the University at Buffalo School of Law studied Louisiana's second-degree murder statute and said the law is extraordinarily broad compared to other states. He pointed out that the underlying child neglect in this case would not even be a felony in other jurisdictions. In most states, what Tiffany and Emmanuel did would have been charged as criminally negligent homicide or manslaughter, crimes that carry sentences of a few years in prison, not life without parole. But Louisiana's law is different. Louisiana's law is harsh. Critics argued that Tiffany and Emmanuel were being punished for being poor. If they had been middle-class parents with resources, they would have had formula. They would have had health insurance. They would have taken the baby to a doctor without hesitation. But they were poor, displaced Hurricane Katrina refugees with no safety net. Supporters of the conviction argued that poverty doesn't excuse letting your baby starve to death. They said every parent, regardless of income, has a duty to seek medical care for a sick child. They pointed out that Shreveport had free clinics and emergency rooms that would have treated the baby regardless of ability to pay. Both perspectives have merit. But the law is the law. And under Louisiana law, Tiffany Woods and Emmanuel Scott were guilty of second-degree murder. Today, both Tiffany Woods and Emmanuel Scott are serving life sentences without the possibility of parole in Louisiana's prison system. They will never be free. They will die behind bars. Baby Emmanuel Scott is buried somewhere in Louisiana. He lived for only 2 months. He survived Hurricane Katrina. He survived the evacuation to Shreveport. But he didn't survive his parents' neglect. This case remains controversial. Was justice served? Or did the criminal justice system punish poverty and ignorance instead of malice? Did Tiffany Woods and Emmanuel Scott deserve life in prison? Or should they have received a lesser sentence? There are no easy answers. What's undeniable is that a baby died. A baby who could have been saved if his parents had taken him to a hospital. A baby whose death was preventable. And that's the tragedy at the heart of this case. Baby Emmanuel didn't have to die, but he did. And his parents will spend the rest of their lives paying for that failure. Case 5. Hannah Barker. July 17, 2018. 9:10 p.m. A 911 call comes into Natchitoches Parish Dispatch. A frantic woman is on the line. Her name is Hannah Nicole Barker. She's 23 years old, and she's reporting that her 6-month-old son has been kidnapped. Hannah tells the dispatcher that 2 strangers came to her mobile home in Montgomery, Louisiana. They sprayed her with mace. When she fled the trailer, they grabbed her baby, Levi Cole Ellerby, and took off. She's hysterical. She's crying. She's begging police to find her baby. Deputies race to the scene. But before they can even arrive at Hannah's trailer, another call comes in. A passing motorist has spotted a fire in a wooded area between some railroad tracks and a residential neighborhood. It looks like someone set a brush fire. First responders head to the fire. They arrive and start putting out the flames. And that's when they see him. A baby. On his stomach. In the middle of the fire. Barely alive. It's Levi. Paramedics rush to save him. But his injuries are catastrophic. 90% of his body has been burned. 90%. This tiny 6-month-old baby has been set on fire. Levi Cole Ellerby is transported to a Shreveport hospital. Doctors work frantically to save him. But there's nothing they can do. The burns are too severe. The next morning, July 18, 2018, Levi dies. Back at the mobile home, detectives are interviewing Hannah Barker. Her story doesn't add up. She claims she was attacked, maced, and her baby was kidnapped. But there's no sign of a struggle. No evidence that anyone else was there. No mace residue on her. And the timeline is suspicious. How did the kidnappers get from her trailer to the woods so fast? How did they know where to go? Why would they set the baby on fire instead of just leaving him somewhere? The Louisiana State Fire Marshal's office gets involved. Lieutenant Jeremy Swisher examines the scene. He determines that the crime scene was staged. This wasn't a random attack. This wasn't a kidnapping gone wrong. This was murder. And Hannah Barker was involved. On July 25, 2018, 8 days after Levi's death, Hannah Barker is arrested. But she's not the only one. Police also arrest Felicia Marie Nicole Smith. Felicia was Hannah's girlfriend. The 2 women were in a romantic relationship. And according to the investigation, they conspired together to kill Levi. Let's back up and talk about who Hannah Barker was. Hannah was 23 years old, living in a mobile home in Montgomery, Louisiana, in Natchitoches Parish. She had a history of drug use and had gone through drug court in Natchitoches Parish. That's where she met Levi's father, Billy Ellerby Jr. They had a relationship, and Levi was born. But Hannah had moved on. She was now in a relationship with Felicia Smith. The two women were living together. And Levi was in the way. That's the theory prosecutors would later present. Levi was an inconvenience. He was a reminder of Hannah's past relationship with Billy. He required attention and care that Hannah didn't want to give. So Hannah and Felicia decided to get rid of him. When Felicia Smith was arrested, she confessed. She told detectives that Hannah had come up with the plan. According to Felicia, Hannah initially wanted Felicia to shoot Levi. Felicia brought a gun. But when the moment came, the gun jammed. It wouldn't fire. So they improvised. They decided to burn Levi instead. According to testimony that would later come out at trial, Hannah told Felicia they needed to burn the baby until he was bones to destroy the evidence. Let that sink in. A mother, Levi's own mother, said her baby needed to be burned until he was nothing but bones. Felicia and Hannah took 6-month-old Levi to a secluded wooded area near some railroad tracks. They brought gasoline or some other accelerant, and they set him on fire. Levi was 6 months old, days away from turning 7 months. His family called him Chunky Monkey because he was such a happy, chubby baby. His obituary described him as the happiest baby who always had a big smile, and his mother set him on fire. The case against Hannah Barker and Felicia Smith was airtight. The physical evidence placed them at the scene. Felicia's confession implicated Hannah as the mastermind. The staged kidnapping story fell apart under scrutiny. But there was a problem. The case was so horrific that finding an impartial jury in Natchitoches Parish would be nearly impossible. Everyone in the area knew about Levi's death. The local media had covered it extensively. People were outraged. There was no way Hannah could get a fair trial in her own community. So the judge ordered a change of venue for jury selection. Jurors would be brought in from outside Natchitoches Parish to ensure fairness. As Hannah's trial date approached, she faced a terrifying reality. If convicted, she could receive the death penalty. Louisiana allows capital punishment for the murder of a victim under the age of 12. Hannah was potentially going to be sentenced to death. Her attorneys advised her to consider a plea deal. On May 4, 2022, Hannah Barker accepted an Alford plea. An Alford plea is unusual. It means Hannah didn't admit guilt, but she acknowledged that the evidence against her was strong enough that a jury would likely convict her. Under the terms of the plea deal, Hannah pleaded guilty to 2 charges: manslaughter of a child under 10 years old and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of a child under 12 years old. She was sentenced to 10 years for the manslaughter charge and 30 years for the conspiracy charge. The sentences would run concurrently, at the same time, meaning her total sentence was 30 years. 30 years. For burning her baby to death. Felicia Smith went through the legal process separately. She ultimately received an 80-year sentence for her role in Levi's death. 80 years for manslaughter, criminal conspiracy, and cruelty to a juvenile. The question everyone asked was, why? Why would a mother do this to her own child? What kind of evil drives someone to set their baby on fire? Special Prosecutor Clifford Strider, who handled the case, made a statement. He said, "In my experience prosecuting cases throughout Louisiana, this case ranks as one of the most heinous and callous acts of cruelty I have ever seen." Heinous, callous, cruel. Those are the words that defined Hannah Barker and what she did to Levi. Levi's family held a funeral for him. They buried the baby who would never grow up. His father, Billy Ellerby Jr., was devastated. He'd lost his son in the most horrific way imaginable. And the woman he'd once trusted, the mother of his child, was responsible. Levi's obituary remembered him as a happy baby with a big smile. The kind of baby who lit up a room. The kind of baby who deserved a long, happy life. Instead, he got 6 months. And he spent his last moments burning alive, placed in a fire by his own mother. Hannah Barker is serving her 30-year sentence in Louisiana's correctional system. She'll be eligible for release when she's in her 50s, if she survives that long in prison. Child killers are not popular in prison. Other inmates despise them. Hannah's life behind bars will not be easy. Felicia Smith is serving her 80 years. She'll likely die in prison. But Levi is already dead. He died on July 18, 2018, in a Shreveport hospital, surrounded by doctors who couldn't save him from the burns his mother inflicted. This case shocked Louisiana. It made national headlines. People couldn't comprehend how a mother could do such a thing. How do you burn your own baby? How do you plan it out, execute it, and then lie about it. Hannah Barker never gave a satisfactory answer. She took a plea deal and avoided a trial. She never had to face Levi's family in court and explain herself. She never had to look them in the eye and justify what she did. She just went to prison. And Levi went into the ground. 6 months old. Burned to death by his mother. In Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana. In the summer of 2018. That's the story of Hannah Barker and her son, Levi Cole Ellerby. It's a story of pure evil. And it's a story Louisiana will never forget. Case 6. Twyena Thomas. September 30th, 2017. Kenner, Louisiana, Jefferson Parish. 2-year-old Chase Thomas takes his last breath. He weighs only 15 pounds. That's approximately half the weight a healthy 2-year-old should weigh. His body is covered in bruises. His skull is fractured. Scars mark his skin, evidence of previous injuries that were never treated. This little boy has been systematically abused and starved for months, maybe his entire short life. And the person responsible for his death is the one person who should have protected him above all others. His mother, Twyena Thomas. Twyena Thomas was 27 years old when she killed her son. She lived in Kenner, a suburb of New Orleans in Jefferson Parish. From the outside, she might have looked like any other young mother. But behind closed doors, she was torturing Chase. We don't know all the details of Chase's life. We don't know what his first word was, or if he ever got to celebrate a birthday party, or what his favorite toy was. What we know is how he died. And that's horrific enough. At 2 years old, Chase should have been running around, playing with toys, learning to talk in sentences. He should have weighed somewhere between 25 to 30 pounds, a healthy, chubby toddler. Instead, he weighed 15 pounds. He was skeletal, starving. When authorities discovered Chase's body, they immediately knew this was a case of severe abuse and neglect. The autopsy revealed the extent of the trauma this little boy had endured. First, the broken skull. Chase had suffered blunt force trauma to his head. Someone had hit him hard enough to fracture his skull. That kind of injury is excruciatingly painful. It would have caused swelling, possibly seizures, definitely agony. And Twyena never took him to a doctor. Then there were the bruises. Chase's body was covered in them. Old bruises, new bruises, bruises in various stages of healing. Someone had been hitting this child repeatedly, over an extended period of time. And there were scars. Scars indicate injuries that had time to heal, meaning Chase had been hurt badly enough to leave permanent marks, and those injuries had gone untreated. Finally, there was the starvation. 15 pounds at 2 years old. That level of malnourishment doesn't happen overnight. It takes months of inadequate feeding to get a child to that point. Chase was being systematically starved. The medical examiner determined that Chase's death was a homicide. The combination of the skull fracture, the ongoing abuse, and the severe malnutrition all contributed to his death. Jefferson Parish authorities arrested Twyena Thomas and charged her with second-degree murder. Under Louisiana law, second-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. There's no discretion. If you're convicted, you get life. The case went to trial in August of 2019. The prosecution presented the medical evidence. They showed photographs of Chase's emaciated body. They detailed his injuries. They argued that Twyena Thomas had tortured her son over a period of months and ultimately caused his death through a combination of abuse and neglect. The defense had very little to work with. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no explanation Twyena could offer that would justify what she did to Chase. She couldn't claim it was an accident. You don't accidentally starve a child down to 15 pounds. She couldn't claim she didn't know he was injured. The broken skull and bruises were impossible to miss. The jury found Twyena Thomas guilty of second-degree murder. It didn't take them long to reach a verdict. The evidence was too damning. Sentencing was scheduled for September 30th, 2019, exactly 2 years to the day after Chase's death. Judge Danielle Taylor presided over the sentencing hearing. What happened next was unusual. Judges typically deliver relatively brief statements at sentencing. They announce the sentence, maybe make a few comments, and that's it. But Judge Taylor did something different. She delivered a scathing condemnation of Twyena Thomas that made headlines across Louisiana. Judge Taylor told Twyena that Chase had died scared, that he had died afraid of a monster, and that monster was his own mother. The judge described Chase's condition at death, the 15-pound body, the broken skull, the scars, the bruises. She talked about the suffering this little boy had endured at his mother's hands. And then Judge Taylor said something extraordinary. She said she wished she could impose more than life imprisonment. She wished the law allowed her to give Twyena an even harsher punishment. But life without parole was the maximum sentence available, so that's what Twyena would get. Judge Taylor was so passionate in her condemnation that she provided written copies of her statement to the district attorney's spokesman so her words could be shared with the public. She wanted everyone to know exactly what Twyena Thomas had done and exactly how she felt about it. The statement was powerful. It was emotional. It was a judge using her platform to speak for a victim who couldn't speak for himself. Twyena Thomas was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She was taken from the courtroom and transported to a Louisiana women's prison to begin serving her sentence. She will never be free again. She will grow old behind bars. She will never have another birthday outside of prison. She will never celebrate another holiday with family. She will never hold another child. Chase Thomas is buried somewhere in Louisiana. His grave probably has a small headstone with his name and dates, 2015 to 2017. 2 years old. That's all he got. We don't know if anyone visits his grave. We don't know if there are flowers or toys left there. We don't know if his extended family mourns him or if he's been forgotten by everyone except the people who worked on his case. What we do know is that Chase deserved better. He deserved a mother who would feed him, protect him, love him. He deserved to grow up. He deserved to have a childhood. Instead, he got Twyena Thomas. And she gave him nothing but pain. This case didn't get as much national media attention as some of the others on this list. There was no sensational element like a fire or a public spectacle. It was just a mother quietly abusing and starving her son to death in a Kenner home. But for the people who worked on this case, the detectives, the prosecutors, the medical examiners, the judge, it was one of the worst they'd ever seen. Judge Taylor's statement made that clear. This wasn't just another case to her. This was a little boy who died in agony because his mother was a monster. Twyena Thomas sits in prison today. She's still relatively young, in her 30s now. She has decades of life ahead of her. Decades to think about what she did. Decades to live with the knowledge that she tortured and killed her own son. Whether she feels remorse, we don't know. Whether she's claimed to have changed or found religion or any of the other things prisoners sometimes do, we don't know. What we know is this. On September 30th, 2017, 2-year-old Chase Thomas died at 15 pounds with a broken skull, covered in bruises and scars, starved and beaten by his mother. And on September 30th, 2019, 2 years later to the day, Twyena Thomas was sentenced to spend the rest of her life in prison for what she did. Justice was served. But Chase is still dead, and nothing will ever change that. Case 7, Sheila Fletcher. January 3, 2022. Slaughter, Louisiana, East Feliciana Parish. A 911 call comes in. A woman named Sheila Fletcher, 66 years old, is reporting that she found her daughter dead. When emergency services arrive at the Fletcher home, they enter the living room. What they find is so horrific, so unimaginable, that even veteran first responders struggle to process it. On a leather couch in the living room is a body. But it's not lying on the couch. It's fused into the couch. The body has been there so long, decomposing and rotting, that the skin has melted into the leather. The person is part of the furniture. The body belongs to Lacey Ellen Fletcher. She's 36 years old. She weighs 96 pounds. And she's been sitting on that couch, in her own waste, unable to move, for approximately 12 years. Her parents, Sheila and Clay Fletcher, let her rot there. They fed her just enough to keep her barely alive. They never took her to a doctor. They never moved her. They just let her sit and decay. And when she finally died, they went on vacation. This is the case of Lacey Fletcher, and it's one of the most disturbing cases of parental neglect in Louisiana history. Let's start at the beginning. Lacey Ellen Fletcher was born on November 25, 1985. She grew up in Slaughter, Louisiana, a small town in East Feliciana Parish. Her parents were Sheila and Clay Fletcher, both well-respected in the community. Sheila was a town alderman, a local politician. Both parents were active in their church. Neighbors knew them as nice people, upstanding citizens, pillars of the community. What neighbors didn't know was that the Fletchers had a daughter. Lacey was rarely seen in public. Most people in Slaughter had no idea she existed. Lacey was autistic. She struggled socially. In high school, she was bullied. The cruelty of her peers wore her down. When she was 16 years old, her parents pulled her out of school. They claimed they would homeschool her. Instead, they isolated her. That was 2002. Lacey was 16 years old, and she had just seen a doctor for what would be the last time in her life. For the next few years, Lacey lived at home. She was withdrawn, anxious, socially awkward. But she was functional. She could walk, talk, take care of herself. Then, around 2010, something changed. Lacey's mental health took a sharp decline. She stopped leaving the living room. She sat on the leather couch and refused to get up. The Fletchers claimed they tried to help. They said Lacey refused to move. They said she would urinate and defecate on towels on the floor rather than go to the bathroom. They took her to see a psychologist, Dr. Donald Hoppe. But they didn't bring Lacey with them. They went alone. They described Lacey's condition to Dr. Hoppe and asked for advice. Dr. Hoppe was alarmed. He urged the Fletchers to hospitalize Lacey immediately. He told them she needed intensive psychiatric care. He said the situation was serious. The Fletchers thanked him for his time, and then they never followed through. They went home. They left Lacey on the couch, and they watched her deteriorate. For 12 years. 12 years. Let that sink in. From approximately 2010 until January of 2022, Lacey Fletcher sat on that couch. She didn't move. She didn't leave the living room. She sat there, day after day, month after month, year after year. Her parents fed her. Not well, but enough to keep her alive. She lost weight steadily. By the time she died, she weighed only 96 pounds. At 5 feet and a few inches tall, that's skeletal. Lacey's body began to break down. Sores developed where her skin pressed against the couch. Those sores became infected. The infections became septic. She had bone infections. Her muscles atrophied. She literally became fused to the couch. Her skin and the leather merged together. Her hair became matted and filthy. Maggots began living in it. Maggots also lived inside her body, feeding on infected tissue. And still, her parents did nothing. They didn't call for medical help. They didn't move her. They didn't clean her properly. They just let her rot. The autopsy would later reveal that Lacey's stomach contained feces and pieces of couch cushioning. She had been so starved, so desperate, that she tried to eat her own waste and the furniture she was sitting on. Think about that. Lacey Fletcher, 36 years old, autistic, terrified, unable to move, was so hungry that she ate feces and foam from the couch. And her parents were downstairs, living their lives, going to church, attending town meetings. Sheila Fletcher continued serving as a town alderman. She was a public figure, attending community events, voting on local issues. Meanwhile, her daughter was dying upstairs. On January 1st through 2nd, 2022, Sheila and Clay Fletcher decided to go on a weekend vacation. They left Lacey alone in the house. Alone on the couch. Unable to move. Unable to call for help. On January 3rd, 2022, they returned from their trip. Sheila went into the living room and found Lacey dead. She called 911. Emergency services arrived, and they discovered a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. East Louisiana Parish Sheriff Jeffrey Travis responded to the scene. He later told reporters that it was, by far the worst scene he had ever encountered in his career. And this was a sheriff who had seen decades of crime scenes. The coroner performed an autopsy on Lacey's remains. The cause of death was determined to be a combination of starvation, severe malnourishment, sepsis, bone infections, and ulcers that had eroded down to the bone. Lacey had essentially been eaten alive by infections while slowly starving to death. And it had taken 12 years. Sheila and Clay Fletcher were arrested and initially charged with second-degree murder. The charges were later dismissed by a judge, but a grand jury re-indicted them in June of 2023. The case drew national and international attention. Media outlets around the world covered Lacey Fletcher's death. People were horrified. How could parents let this happen? How could they watch their daughter deteriorate for 12 years and do nothing? The Fletchers' defense attorneys argued that Sheila and Clay were elderly and overwhelmed. They claimed Lacey refused help, that she was stubborn and wouldn't let them move her or clean her properly. But prosecutors weren't buying it. They argued that even if Lacey refused to move, her parents had a legal and moral obligation to get her professional help. They could have called paramedics. They could have had Lacey involuntarily hospitalized. They had options. Instead, they chose to let her die slowly on that couch. On February 6, 2024, both Sheila and Clay Fletcher entered no contest pleas to manslaughter. A no contest plea means they didn't admit guilt, but they acknowledged that the evidence against them was strong enough for a conviction. On March 20th, 2024, both were sentenced. Judge Catherine Jones handed down a sentence of 40 years in prison with 20 years suspended, plus 5 years of supervised probation. Effectively, both Sheila and Clay Fletcher would serve 20 years behind bars. They're both in their late 60s now. 20 years means they'll be in their late 80s if they survive their sentences. There's a good chance they'll die in prison. Some people thought the sentence was too lenient. They argued that what the Fletchers did to Lacey was torture, and they should have been convicted of murder, not manslaughter. Others thought the sentence was appropriate given their age and the complexity of the case. What everyone agreed on was that Lacey Fletcher deserved better. Lacey deserved to get proper mental health care when she was 16 and struggling in school. She deserved to see a doctor when her condition worsened in 2010. She deserved to be hospitalized when Dr. Hopper recommended it. She deserved to not spend 12 years sitting on a couch, starving, rotting, eating her own feces to survive. Lacey Fletcher is buried in Louisiana. Her grave is visited by strangers who heard her story and were moved by her suffering. People who never knew her in life mourn her in death. Sheila and Clay Fletcher are both serving their 20-year sentences in Louisiana prisons. They're separated, men's and women's facilities. They'll likely never see each other again outside of prison. Their home in Slaughter is empty now. The couch where Lacey died has been removed as evidence. The living room where she spent the last 12 years of her life is probably still stained. No one wants to buy that house. Who would want to live in a place where someone died such a horrible death? This case raised important questions about caregiver responsibility, mental health care, and when intervention should be mandatory. Should there be regular welfare checks for adults with disabilities? Should doctors be required to report when patients stop showing up for care? Louisiana lawmakers discussed potential reforms in the wake of Lacey's death, but as of now, no major legislation has passed. What we're left with is a tragedy. Lacey Fletcher, born November 25, 1985, died January 3, 2022, at 36 years old. She spent 12 years dying slowly on a couch while her parents watched. And when it was finally over, they were held accountable. 20 years in prison for Sheila. 20 years for Clay. But Lacey is still dead, and nothing will bring her back. Case 8, Whitney Ard. June 26, 2022. Denova Street, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Whitney Adrielle Ard walks into her 2-year-old son's room and finds him unresponsive. Mitchell George Robinson III, nicknamed Dew by his family, is lying in bed. He's not breathing. Whitney calls 911. Paramedics arrive and attempt to resuscitate the little boy, but it's too late. Mitchell is dead. Cause of death, fentanyl overdose. The toddler had 14 nanograms per milliliter of fentanyl in his bloodstream, over 4 times the lethal dose for an adult. For a 2-year-old, it was catastrophic. This wasn't the first time Mitchell had overdosed on fentanyl. It was the 3rd time. And this time, there would be no coming back. Whitney Ard was 31 years old when her son died. She lived in Baton Rouge with Mitchell and his older sister. The children's father, Mitchell Robinson Jr., was also involved in their lives and involved in the drug trade. Mitchell Sr. was a drug dealer. When narcotics agents raided the family home, they found approximately 4 ounces of fentanyl, crystal methamphetamine, over $25,000 in cash, and firearms. This wasn't small-time dealing. This was a serious operation. And right in the middle of this drug house were 2 small children. Let's talk about Mitchell Robinson III. He was 2 years old. He should have been playing with toys, learning to talk, watching cartoons. Instead, he was living in a home filled with deadly drugs. Fentanyl is one of the most dangerous substances on the planet. It's a synthetic opioid that's 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. A tiny amount, a dose smaller than a few grains of salt, can kill an adult. For a child, even less. And Whitney Ard kept fentanyl in a house with a 2-year-old. The first overdose happened on April 12, 2022. Mitchell was rushed to Our Lady of the Lake Regional Medical Center, showing signs of drug exposure. He was given Narcan, a drug that reverses opioid overdoses, and he survived. You'd think that would be a wake-up call. You'd think Whitney would immediately remove all drugs from the house, get help, protect her children. But she didn't. On June 4th, 2022, less than 2 months later, Mitchell overdosed again. He required a second dose of Narcan. Again, he survived. 2 overdoses in less than 2 months. 2 times this little boy nearly died. And still, Whitney didn't change anything. On June 17th, 2022, doctors performed a blood test on Mitchell. The results came back positive for fentanyl. The child had the drug in his system. At that point, hospital staff had a legal obligation to report the situation to Child Protective Services. The Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS, was notified. Social workers were supposed to investigate. But nothing happened. DCFS failed to act. No one removed the children from the home. No one followed up to ensure Mitchell was safe. The system failed him. 9 days later, on June 26, 2022, Mitchell overdosed for the 3rd time. And this time, there was no saving him. When police investigated Mitchell's death, they interviewed his older sister. What she told them was heartbreaking. The little girl said she saw pills on her mother's bed. She said her brother ate mom's pills. She described how Whitney discovered that Mitchell had ingested the pills and became furious. Instead of rushing him to the hospital, Whitney whipped the toddler as punishment. Then she made him go to bed. Mitchell went to sleep, and he never woke up. The autopsy confirmed what everyone already suspected. Mitchell died of a fentanyl overdose. The toxicology report showed that he had 14 nanograms per milliliter of fentanyl in his blood, a dose that would kill an adult, let alone a 2-year-old. Whitney Ard was arrested and initially charged with negligent homicide. But as the investigation progressed and more evidence came to light, prosecutors upgraded the charge to second-degree murder. Under Louisiana law, second-degree murder includes killings that result from a depraved indifference to human life. Prosecutors argued that Whitney's actions met that standard. She knew the drugs were in the house. She knew her son had overdosed twice before. She knew the dangers. And yet she continued to keep fentanyl accessible to a toddler. That's not negligence. That's depraved indifference. In April of 2024, as Whitney's trial date approached, the state offered her a plea deal: plead guilty to manslaughter and accept a 30-year sentence. It was a generous offer considering she was facing mandatory life without parole if convicted of second-degree murder. Whitney Ard rejected the plea deal. She insisted she wanted to go to trial. The trial began in September of 2024. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. They showed hospital records documenting Mitchell's 3 fentanyl exposures. They played the interview with Mitchell's sister describing how he ate the pills and was punished. They presented toxicology reports showing the lethal level of fentanyl in the child's body. The defense tried to argue that Whitney didn't know Mitchell would access the drugs. They claimed she was also a victim of addiction and wasn't in her right mind. They asked the jury for mercy. The jury didn't give it. On September 17, 2024, after deliberations, they returned a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Whitney's defense team immediately requested a new trial, arguing that the verdict was unjust. Judge Louise Hines Myers denied the motion. Sentencing was scheduled for October 21, 2024. Judge Myers had no discretion. Louisiana law mandates life imprisonment without parole for second-degree murder convictions. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Myers didn't hide her feelings. She looked directly at Whitney Ard and called her actions abhorrent. She said, "It makes me feel like you were not a mother." Not a mother. That's what the judge said. Because real mothers protect their children. Real mothers don't let them overdose on fentanyl 3 times. Real mothers don't whip them for eating pills and then send them to bed to die. Whitney Ard was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will never be free again. She will die behind bars. Her defense team announced their intention to appeal, but as of now, the conviction stands. Mitchell Robinson III is buried somewhere in Louisiana. He was 2 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. Instead, he died because his mother cared more about drugs than his safety. But this case didn't end with Whitney's conviction. The investigation into Mitchell's death exposed massive failures within Louisiana's child welfare system. Remember how DCFS was notified after Mitchell's second overdose in June of 2022? Remember how social workers were supposed to investigate and protect the children? They didn't. They completely dropped the ball. Louisiana State Inspector General Stephen Street launched an investigation into DCFS's handling of the case. His report was scathing. He slammed the agency for failing to protect Mitchell despite multiple red flags. He documented how social workers didn't follow protocols, didn't conduct timely home visits, and didn't remove the children from a clearly dangerous situation. The report made national news. DCFS Secretary Marquetta Walters faced intense criticism. The agency's failures had directly contributed to Mitchell's death. In the wake of the scandal, Walters resigned. Louisiana lawmakers held hearings and demanded accountability. The result was the creation of a new position, the Children's Ombudsman. The Ombudsman's office has independent oversight authority over Louisiana's entire child welfare system. The position was created specifically to prevent another Mitchell Robinson situation, to ensure that when children are in danger, someone with power will intervene. It's a meaningful reform, but it came too late for Mitchell. Mitchell's father, Mitchell Robinson Jr., was also prosecuted. He was convicted on drug charges related to the narcotics operation in the home. He received a lengthy sentence. Mitchell's older sister, who witnessed her brother's final hours, was placed in foster care. Where she is now, whether she's safe and healing, we don't know. Her identity has been protected. What we do know is that she'll carry the trauma of what she saw for the rest of her life. She watched her mother let her little brother die. She told adults what happened, and it still took months for justice to be served. Whitney Ard sits in Louisiana's women's prison serving her life sentence. She's in her mid-30s now. She has decades ahead of her. Decades to think about her son. Decades to regret not protecting him. Mitchell Robinson III doesn't have any time left. His life ended at 2 years old on June 26, 2022, on DeNova Street in Baton Rouge. He overdosed on fentanyl 3 times. The first 2 times, he was saved. The third time, his mother sent him to bed instead of calling for help. And he died. This case sparked a statewide reckoning with Louisiana's child welfare system. It led to reforms, resignations, and new oversight. Mitchell's death became a catalyst for change. But none of that brings him back. And for his family, the people who actually loved him, the reforms don't ease the pain. Mitchell deserved better. He deserved a mother who would protect him. He deserved a system that would intervene when he was in danger. He deserved to grow up. Instead, he's buried in the ground, and Whitney Ard is behind bars for the rest of her life. That's justice. But it's cold comfort when a 2-year-old is dead. Case 9, Bunnock Landon. April 26, 2023. 7:30 a.m. Harahan, Louisiana, a suburb of New Orleans. Michael Fontenelle wakes up in his home. He looks around for his 6-year-old daughter, Bella. She's not in her bed. He looks for his girlfriend, Bunnock Hannah Landon. She's not in the house either. Michael calls the police. He reports that both Bella and Hannah are missing. Less than an hour later, at approximately 8:20 a.m., police make a horrific discovery. On the front lawn of Jennifer Zeladon's home on Sedgefield Drive, less than 2 blocks away, there's a 10-gallon bucket. Inside the bucket is a body. It's Bella Fontenelle. She's been strangled and beaten to death. And her stepmother, Hannah Landon, is the one who killed her. Let's start from the beginning. Bunnock Landon, who went by Hannah, was 43 years old in 2023. She'd met Michael Fontenelle a few years earlier at a Baton Rouge gentleman's club where she worked. They started dating, and eventually, Hannah moved into Michael's home in Harahan. Michael had a daughter from a previous relationship, Bella Fontenelle. Michael shared custody with Bella's biological mother, Jennifer Zeladon. Bella split her time between her father's house and her mother's house, just like millions of children of divorced parents do. Bella was 6 years old. She attended kindergarten at St. Matthew the Apostle School. By all accounts, she was a happy little girl who loved her parents and was adjusting well to the custody arrangement. But there was a problem, Hannah Landon. Bella didn't like Hannah. And according to what would later come out in court, Hannah didn't like Bella either. At some point before April 25, 2023, Bella told a therapist that Ms. Hannah was mean to her. That was Bella's way of expressing that she felt uncomfortable around Hannah. When Michael learned about what Bella had told the therapist, he confronted Hannah. He told her that if Bella didn't feel safe around her, they might need to reconsider their relationship. Hannah Landon didn't take that well. On April 25, 2023, Hannah decided to solve the problem permanently. If Bella was threatening Hannah's relationship with Michael, Bella had to go. Surveillance cameras from multiple homes in the neighborhood captured what happened next. At approximately 9:35 p.m. on April 25th, cameras recorded Hannah Landon walking through the neighborhood pulling a wagon. In the wagon was a 10-gallon bucket. The bucket was covered. Hannah pulled that wagon through the streets of Harahan, heading toward Jennifer Zeladon's house on Sedgefield Drive, Bella's mother's house. She walked for about 2 blocks. Cameras captured her the whole way. When she reached Jennifer's house, Hannah left the bucket on the front lawn. Then she walked away, pulling the empty wagon behind her. Inside the bucket was Bella's body. The next morning, when Michael woke up and discovered Bella and Hannah were both missing, he immediately called police. Officers began canvassing the neighborhood. They reviewed surveillance footage, and they found the bucket on Jennifer's lawn. When police opened the bucket, they found Bella. She'd been murdered. The autopsy would later determine that she died from manual strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. Someone had choked her with their hands until she was dead, and also struck her in the head with enough force to cause fatal injuries. That someone was Hannah Landon. While police were processing the scene, they were also searching for Hannah. Where had she gone? It didn't take long to find her. Hannah hadn't fled to another state. She hadn't gone into hiding. She'd simply dumped Bella's body and gone back to Michael's house. When police arrived to question her, they found evidence linking her to the crime. There was blood on the bucket that matched Hannah's DNA. Her cell phone records showed she'd been in the area where Bella's body was found at the exact time the surveillance cameras captured someone pulling a wagon. But there was more. After the murder, Hannah had buried her cell phone near a construction site. When police recovered it, they checked her search history. Hannah had been looking up criminal defense attorneys. She knew what she'd done, and she was already planning her defense. Hannah Landon was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, and other related charges. The case went to trial in April of 2025. Hannah's defense team argued that she was insane at the time of the murder, that she wasn't in control of her actions, and shouldn't be held criminally responsible. The prosecution wasn't buying it. They argued that Hannah's actions showed clear premeditation and consciousness of guilt. She waited until Michael was asleep. She murdered Bella. She transported the body in a bucket, being careful to avoid being seen. She disposed of the body on the biological mother's lawn, a cruel, calculated move. She buried her phone to hide evidence. She searched for defense attorneys. None of that sounds like insanity. It sounds like cold-blooded murder. The prosecution called a jailhouse witness who testified that Hannah had been faking insanity symptoms while in custody. The witness said Hannah bragged about her plan to use an insanity defense. Prosecutors also pointed out the timing. Within 24 hours of Bella telling her father that Ms. Hannah is mean to her, Hannah had killed Bella. That's not a psychotic break. That's revenge. The trial was emotional. Bella's family filled the courtroom. Her 9-year-old sister attended and listened to testimony about how her little sister had been murdered. On May 1, 2025, the jury deliberated. It took them less than 1 hour to reach a verdict. Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of 2 counts of obstruction of justice. Hannah Landon showed no emotion when the verdict was read. Sentencing was scheduled for May 6, 2025. Judge Nancy Miller presided. In Louisiana, first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The obstruction charges carried additional time. Judge Miller sentenced Hannah Landon to life in prison at hard labor for the murder, plus 40 years for each of the 2 obstruction of justice counts. The sentences would run consecutively, one after the other. Total sentence, life plus 80 years. Before imposing the sentence, Judge Miller made a statement. She looked directly at Hannah Landon and said, "This court never wants you to see the light of day again." Evil was on full display in this courtroom. Evil. That's the word the judge used. Because what Hannah did to Bella was pure evil. At the sentencing hearing, Bella's 9-year-old sister read a victim impact statement. Through tears, the little girl said, "To me, Bella wasn't just my sister, she was my best friend. That was taken away because of you." Bella's mother, Jennifer Zeladon, also spoke. She described the agony of losing her daughter, the horror of finding out Bella's body had been left on her lawn like trash. She said Hannah Landon had destroyed their family. Michael Fontenelle, Bella's father, was devastated. He had brought Hannah into his home, introduced her to his daughter, trusted her. And she had murdered Bella. After the sentencing, Hannah Landon was transported to the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women to begin serving her life sentence. She will never be free. She will die in prison. St. Matthew the Apostle School, where Bella had been a kindergarten student, closed for 2 days after her death. The school held a memorial service. Bella's classmates, many of whom were too young to fully understand what had happened, mourned their friend. The community of Harahan rallied around Bella's family. Fundraisers were organized. Memorial funds were established. People left flowers and stuffed animals on Jennifer Zeledon's lawn where Bella's body had been found. But all the community support in the world can't bring Bella back. This case became national news. Media outlets across the country covered the trial. People were horrified by the brutality of the crime and the calculated way Hannah had disposed of Bella's body. Surveillance footage showing Hannah pulling the wagon with the bucket became key evidence. Multiple neighbors' cameras had captured her. She thought she was being sneaky, walking through the neighborhood at night. But modern technology caught her. That footage was played in court. Jurors watched Hannah Landon pull a wagon containing a 6-year-old girl's body through the streets of Harahan. It was chilling. Hannah Landon's backstory also came out during the trial. She had children of her own, but she no longer had custody of them. That raised questions. What had happened with her own kids? Why had she lost custody? The answers weren't fully explored at trial, but the implication was clear. Hannah Landon was not a good mother. She had failed her own children, and she had killed someone else's child. Today, Hannah Landon sits in a Louisiana prison serving life plus 80 years. She's in her late 40s now. She will spend the rest of her life behind bars. She will never attend another family gathering. She will never celebrate a holiday outside of prison. She will never feel freedom again. And she'll have to live with what she did to Bella. Bella Fontanelle would have turned 7 years old a few months after her death. She would be 8 now. She should be in 2nd or 3rd grade, making friends, learning to read chapter books, discovering her interests. Instead, she's buried in Louisiana. Her life ended at 6 years old because her father's girlfriend couldn't stand the thought of sharing Michael with Bella. Bella's sister will grow up without her best friend. Bella's mother will spend the rest of her life grieving. Bella's father will carry the guilt of bringing Hannah into their lives. And Hannah Landon will rot in prison, exactly where she belongs. Case 10, Kristen Bass. January 1st, 2026. New Year's Day. A day that's supposed to represent fresh starts, new beginnings, hope for the future. For 1-year-old Aislinn Moss, it was the day her mother shot and killed her. This case is the most recent on our list, and it's still developing. As of the recording of this video, Kristen Bass is awaiting trial. But what we know so far is disturbing enough to include her in this documentary. Kristen Bass was 28 years old on January 1st, 2026. She lived on Qualqueshu Street in Sulphur, Louisiana, in Calcasieu Parish. She lived with her boyfriend, Bradley Moss, who is the father of her 2 daughters. On New Year's Day, at approximately 8:20 p.m., Sulphur Police Department received multiple calls reporting a shooting at the Qualqueshu Street residence. Officers responded immediately. When they arrived, they found a scene of horror. 1-year-old Aislinn Moss had been shot. Paramedics attempted to save her, but it was too late. The little girl was dead. Aislinn's father, Bradley Moss, was in shock. He told police what he'd witnessed. According to Bradley, he was in another room when he heard a loud boom, a gunshot. He ran toward the sound and found Kristen Bass holding a gun. Their 1-year-old daughter had just been shot. But what Bradley says Kristen told him next is what makes this case absolutely chilling. Bradley told investigators that Kristen looked at him and said, "I just sent our baby to God. Now I gotta get her." Her referred to the couple's 2-year-old daughter, who was also in the house. Kristen Bass had just murdered one of her daughters, and she was planning to kill the other one too. Bradley Moss realized he was in a nightmare. His 1-year-old daughter was dead or dying. His girlfriend was armed. His 2-year-old daughter was in danger. He had to act fast. We don't know exactly what happened in the next few minutes, but somehow Bradley managed to prevent Kristen from harming the 2-year-old. When police arrived, the older daughter was physically unharmed. Officers secured the scene, arrested Kristen Bass, and called the Department of Children and Family Services. The 2-year-old was taken into protective custody. Kristen Bass was booked into Calcasieu Parish Correctional Center. She was charged with first-degree murder, the most serious murder charge in Louisiana. Bond was set at $10 million. $10 million. That's how seriously the court took this case. Kristen was also charged with direct contempt of court, suggesting she may have violated a previous court order, though the details of that charge haven't been made public. After the arrest, Bradley Moss spoke to local media. He was visibly shaken, still processing what had happened. He said, "I almost lost 2 babies. I lost one because her mama wanted to send her to God." That phrase, "send her to God," is what Kristen allegedly said after shooting Aislinn. It suggests she believed she was doing something righteous, something spiritual. Maybe she thought she was saving her children from something. Maybe she was experiencing a psychotic break. Maybe she was under the influence of drugs. We don't know yet. The investigation is ongoing. What we do know is that 1-year-old Aislinn Moss is dead, shot by her own mother on New Year's Day. The case is still in its very early stages. Kristen Bass hasn't gone to trial yet. We don't know if she'll plead guilty, accept a plea deal, or go to trial claiming insanity. We don't know what her motive was. We don't know if there's a history of mental illness or drug use. What we do know is that on January 1st, 2026, a mother shot her 1-year-old daughter to death and was planning to kill her 2-year-old daughter as well. Sulphur Police Department is continuing to investigate. Sergeant Jeremy Kane has asked anyone with additional information about the case to come forward. Aislinn Moss was only 1 year old. She'd just celebrated her first birthday a few months earlier. She was learning to walk, maybe starting to say her first words. She had her whole life ahead of her. Her older sister, the 2-year-old, will grow up knowing that her mother killed her baby sister and tried to kill her too. That child is now in foster care, separated from both parents, living with strangers, dealing with trauma no 2-year-old should ever experience. Bradley Moss lost his daughter and his girlfriend in the span of minutes. His entire family was destroyed on New Year's Day. He'll spend the rest of his life replaying that moment, wondering if there was something he could have done differently, mourning the daughter he lost, and worrying about the daughter who survived. Kristen Bass sits in Calcasieu Parish Jail with bond set at $10 million. She's awaiting trial for first-degree murder. If convicted, she faces life in prison without parole, potentially even the death penalty, since the victim was under 12 years old. The case will unfold over the coming months and years. There will be hearings, motions, maybe a trial. The details of what led Kristen to shoot her daughter will eventually come out. But nothing will change the fact that Aislinn Moss is dead. A 1-year-old baby, shot by her mother on New Year's Day 2026 in Sulphur, Louisiana. This case is a reminder that evil doesn't take a holiday. While families across America were celebrating the new year, toasting to fresh starts and new opportunities, Kristen Bass was shooting her baby daughter. Aislinn's story is still being written. The legal proceedings haven't concluded. We don't have all the answers yet. But we know enough to include Kristen Bass in this documentary. We know enough to say she belongs on this list of Louisiana mothers who committed unthinkable crimes. As this case develops, more information will come to light. We'll learn more about Kristen's background, her mental state, her motive. We'll hear from family members, friends, maybe even Kristen herself if she chooses to testify. But none of that will bring Aislinn back. 1-year-old, shot on New Year's Day, by her own mother. That's the story of Kristen Bass. And it's still unfolding. 10 cases. 10 Louisiana mothers. 10 lives destroyed. From Yvonne Sepulvado in 1992 to Kristen Bass in 2026, we've covered over 3 decades of unimaginable crimes. We've seen children burned, starved, strangled, shot, and neglected to death. We've seen mothers who prioritized relationships, drugs, convenience, or their own twisted sense of reality over the lives of their children. These cases span different parishes across Louisiana, from DeSoto Parish in the north to Jefferson Parish in the south, from Natchitoches to Baton Rouge to Harahan. No region of Louisiana has been spared. The victims range from 2 months old to 36 years old. Baby Emmanuel Scott, 2-month-old victim of post-Katrina neglect. 6-month-old Levi Ellerby, burned in the woods. 6-year-old Wesley Mercer, scalded in a bathtub. 9-year-old Camille Hebert and 7-year-old Braxton Hebert, stabbed by their mother. 36-year-old Sheila Fletcher, left to rot on a couch for 12 years. The sentences varied. Some of these mothers received 20 years. Others received life without parole. One, Amy Hebert, received 2 consecutive life sentences. Another, Bunnock Landon, received life plus 80 years. And Christopher Sepulvado, though not a mother himself, spent 33 years on death row before dying of natural causes. What these cases have in common is the betrayal at their core. These weren't random acts of violence by strangers. These were mothers, the people who are supposed to love, protect, and nurture, who instead became killers. They serve as a reminder that evil exists, that the title mother doesn't automatically confer goodness or virtue, that some people, regardless of their relationship to their victims, are capable of monstrous acts. Louisiana's criminal justice system responded to these crimes with harsh sentences. Second-degree murder in Louisiana carries mandatory life without parole. First-degree murder can result in the death penalty. These mothers face the full weight of Louisiana law, and in most cases, they'll spend the rest of their lives behind bars. But prison sentences don't undo the harm. Yvonne Sepulvado served 7.5 years and walked free while her son remains dead. Amy Hebert will die in prison, but Camille and Braxton will never grow up. Whitney Ard's conviction led to statewide child welfare reforms, but Mitchell Robinson III is still gone. Justice was served in these cases, but justice feels hollow when the victims are dead children. If you made it to the end of this documentary, thank you for bearing witness to these stories. These cases are difficult to hear, uncomfortable to sit with, painful to contemplate. But they're important. They remind us to pay attention to the children around us, to report suspicions of abuse, to intervene when we see something wrong, to support systems that protect vulnerable kids. They remind us that maternal instinct isn't universal, that some people shouldn't be parents, that biology doesn't guarantee love, and they remind us that Louisiana will not tolerate those who harm children. The sentences in these cases reflect the state's commitment to protecting kids and punishing those who fail them. If you found this documentary valuable, please like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to Crime Unknown for more comprehensive true crime coverage. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. And if you or someone you know is struggling with the urge to harm a child, please reach out for help. Call the National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD. Resources are available. Help is possible. These 10 cases represent 10 failures. 10 children who deserved better. 10 families destroyed. 10 mothers who will spend decades, or the rest of their lives, paying for what they did. May the victims rest in peace. May the survivors find healing. And may Louisiana never forget what happened to these children. This has been Crime Unknown. Thank you for watching.